Death has a way of revealing the true nature of the human heart. Additionally, a lot of believers are doing things during funerals that hurt God's spirit without even recognizing it. Not all tears are holy. Not every funeral custom glorifies the Lord. I want to show you something today that will alter how you deal with sadness for the rest of your life. Due to the fact that
When you do them at a funeral, it might negatively impact your faith, disrespect the deceased, and lead to unintended consequences. Ecclesiastes 7:2 makes this apparent. Visiting a house of grief is preferable to visiting a place of feasting, because everyone's fate is death. This is important for the living to remember. Thus, a funeral is never merely a ritual. It's a sacred moment that calls for the same consideration as any other. Spiritual realm. It is not our place as Christians to deny sadness or act as though it doesn't hurt. However, we are asked to grieve in a different way than those who have no hope, because your soul can be shaped far more than you think by what you do at a funeral, what you allow into that moment, and what you participate in out of custom or pressure. We'll discuss 7 things you should never, ever do at a funeral today. One should never mourn like people who are without hope. Let's start with what the Bible makes abundantly evident. Brothers and sisters, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death, so that you do not grieve like the rest of mankind, who have no hope, states 1 Thessalonians 4:13. I vividly recall attending a close relative's funeral and witnessing relatives fall into a grief that had no bottom, no light, and no anchor at all.
It was despair rather than sadness, and because our grief is meant to appear differently as believers, I was deeply uncomfortable at that precise moment. This does not imply that we are not allowed to cry. In John 11:35, one of the Bible's shortest but most potent verses, Jesus cried at Lazarus' tomb. Even God's Son experienced sadness, but it was never hopeless, since he was aware of what lay ahead. The risk arises when a believer grieves in exactly the same way as someone who has no relationship with God at all, giving up, publicly doubting God's goodness, or saying that life is meaningless. Your loved one is not being honored by that. That is letting your faith be overthrown by grief. Grieve profoundly, but never in a way that belies the resurrection. 2, never try to communicate with the dead or seek advice from mediums. Sadly, even among self-described Christians, this is one of the most prevalent and spiritually hazardous points on the list. I recall reading of a woman who was saddened by the death of her husband and was persuaded to go see someone who said they could deliver a last word from the departed. She didn't act maliciously, but rather out of desperation. All she wanted was closure. Closure, however, was not what she unlocked that day. It was a door. Deuteronomy 18:10 and 11 are straightforward. There should be no one among you who engages in witchcraft, divination, or sorcery, interprets omens, casts spells, is a medium or spiritist, or consults the dead. This is not a recommendation. It is a directive that appears repeatedly throughout the Bible. Because God is fully aware of our vulnerability while we are grieving. When someone passes away, they either immediately enter the Lord's presence or are cut off from him. Luke 16 states that they are not hanging around, waiting to pay a stranger to deliver messages. The person you lose is never the one who reacts during those sessions. The enemy is able to enter the human heart through the opening that grief creates. You miss him, therefore don't give him that door. Instead of taking your grief to a medlium in a dimly lit room, take it to God in prayer. 3. Never use the funeral as a stage for a show rather than a place of devotion. Though subtle, this is one of the most ignored points. There will be times during funerals when sorrow turns into theater, when individuals compete in their expressions of grief, when the loudest cry is seen as the most genuine love, and when silent faith is treated
as being icy. According to Proverbs 14:30, life to the body, but envy rots the bones. Funerals can turn into bizarre settings where people pretend to be grieving in order to be seen, to show loyalty, or to settle old grudges within a family. There may even be arguments over who gets to speak, who gets to sit where, and who is truly the most devastated. Being revered and begins to function as a performance for a crowd that never ought to have been there. 4. Never bury resentment next to the body. This is one of the most prevalent and heavy points on this list. Many families bring decades worth of unsolved issues to a funeral. Rather than letting go of their resentment in that last instant, they bury it deeper, persuading themselves that the offense is no longer significant because the individual is no longer with them. Therefore, forgiveness is not necessary. However, when someone passes away, unforgiveness does not go away. It becomes calcified. According to Mark 11:25, "And when you kneel in prayer, forgive anyone who has wronged you, so that your Father may pardon you in heaven." Observe how this verse atones for your transgressions. It does not state, unless the person has died. The individual who has wronged you does not benefit from forgiveness. It is for your own soul's liberation. Even at their own parents' funerals, I have witnessed siblings stand on different sides of a coffin, unable to talk to each other, and letting an old pain win. The tomb should never be used as a memorial to resentment. Don't let the coffin close while your heart remains locked if you harbor resentment toward the deceased or toward the person standing next to you during the funeral. 5. Never put your faith in things, rituals, or superstitions rather than in Christ. Funerals are surrounded by customs in various cultures, such as candles and certain objects placed within the coffin. Illuminated in particular ways, customs designed to keep the deceased spirit safe, or superstitions regarding what should or shouldn't be done to allow the dead to rest in peace. Colossians 2:8 warns us, "takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the elemental spiritual forces of this world, rather than on Christ." Many of these customs are not impartial. They discreetly impart that a person's eternal rest relies on a ritual. Instead of focusing on Jesus' completed work on the cross, I performed by the living. That is a risky replacement. A soul's fate was predetermined the instant they breathed their final breath, not by an object placed next to them, a candle, or a chant. Biblical truth does not have to be compromised in order to respect culture and family. Don't allow tradition to subtly take the place of the gospel when the gospel is most needed by your family. 6. During the event, never spread rumors about the deceased or their relatives. Although this is an uncomfortable topic, it must be made. Sadly, one of the most frequent venues for rumors to circulate is at funerals. Whispered condemnations fill parking lots and hallways. Were you aware of how they actually died? Have you heard the truth about what transpired in that marriage? I was always aware that there was a problem in their family. According to Proverbs 11:13, a gossip betrays a confidence, but a trustworthy person keeps a secret. James 1:26 adds, "Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless." I've seen bereaved widows overhear discussions that never intended for their ears. Conversations that make someone else's darkest day enjoyable? That is cruel, not just irresponsible. Funerals are places of worship. Gossiping at a graveside is not a sign of respect for the deceased. It is disrespectful to the God who is listening in on every discussion in that room. 7. Never leave a funeral without assessing your own preparedness in God's eyes.